Welcome to Introduction to Game Production. I'm Jim. In this lesson, we're going to be talking about the testing phase. And if you've made it this far into the production of your game, you're almost there. But a lot of teams struggle when they get to the testing phase on how to prioritize resources appropriately to ensure that you're able to meet the launch timeline of your game. It's especially hard because everyone wants the game to be perfect, but in the end, you're never going to get to that line of perfection. And this means that the testing phase could go on forever. And the role of the producer in the testing phase is to define when the game is good enough. So at the start of the testing phase, it's important that you meet with the team and make sure that everyone is aligned on what is required to launch the game. So you'll want to define what the phase deliverables are for this phase. You'll want to establish a phase timeline for the testing phase. And this includes a meeting cadence of how often the team will meet to discuss various topics related to the testing phase and ultimately how do you get to launch. You'll want to define communication guidelines because during the testing phase, things can get a little bit chaotic, and it's important that everyone has clear lines of communication within the team and within their individual teams. And it's also important that everyone understands their responsibilities to the project and to the team. So during the testing phase, you're going to be creating prototypes for people to play. And in most cases, you're going to be building what are called beta prototypes, which are going to be played by external playtesters. Now, there's two common terms that are used with beta prototypes, and that is closed beta, which means the amount of playtesters is very restricted and controlled internally, or open beta prototypes, which means the number of players is less restricted and there's a lot more access to the beta prototype. It's really up to your team to determine which of these would be best for your project. And in addition to the prototypes that are going to be played by the playtesters, if you do have a playable demo that's used for marketing purposes, you'll want to update this to include the latest features so that players that are downloading this demo have a really good representation of what they should expect if they purchase the game. It's also important to set up your meeting cadence. And during the testing phase, it's very common to use agile or sprint-based project management methods. So it's important at the beginning of the phase to define how those meetings will be managed and what can be expected at each of those meetings. In my experience, it's very common to have a build done before the end of each sprint that represents all of the work that's done during that sprint. And then this can be an updated version of the beta prototype. Your marketing team should be heavily engaged at this point as well, which means the marketing plan should be complete and the marketing plan should have their marketing collateral defined and the advertising campaigns should begin. It's also important in the digital age to start spreading awareness via social media channels and to begin further engagement with your community. The community engagement should almost be constant at this point. And if you remember from the beginning of the course, we discussed that the testing phase should take up about 30% of the total timeline for your project. This can be a struggle for some producers because if the project timeline had started to slip, usually it's going to cut into the testing phase, which means you may have a reduced amount of testing time if you weren't able to keep the project on time. So going back to the previous phases, it's really important that you stick to those timelines because at the end of the day, it ultimately is going to eat into the testing time that we hope to allocate at the end of the project. And like I said earlier, the testing phase is best handled using agile project management methods due to the constantly shifting landscape of the project. Your QA testers and beta testers are going to be constantly reporting bugs, and the game is going to be getting regular updates. And because of this, it's usually good to have sprint meetings that the team regularly attends so that you can get constant updates and constant communication to the team. And this brings me to the meeting cadence. Sprint meetings can be very useful during the testing phase to check in on the status of open and closed bugs and get an understanding of the overall scope of the project. And when it comes to the individual teams, the team lead should schedule additional meetings as appropriate. And especially during this phase, it may even be appropriate to have a daily stand-up meeting every morning so that responsibilities can be handed out to all the team members and everyone can understand what they should be working on that day. During the testing phase, the QA team is going to be heavily engaged and arguably the most engaged throughout the entire project. So it's important that the QA team has defined a clear path for bug reporting and resolution. It's typical for bugs to be assigned a criticality, meaning how important they are to the overall game, which team is responsible for fixing the bug, the owner that owns the individual bug, if there's any other bugs that are blocking or blocked by that bug, and then a due date for the team to strive to for fixing that bug. It's common to have this pipeline laid out, and I've given an example bug workflow where the bug is received by the QA team. They delegate responsibility to the team lead from that team. The team lead will assign an owner who will work to resolve that bug. Once the bug is resolved, they'll pass it back to their team lead to verify that it has been resolved. And then the team lead will pass it back to the QA team to close out the bug and verify that it's working. During the testing phase, it's also important that each of your teams understands their responsibilities. So it's very common for each of your teams to be heavily engaged with bug fixing and including final polish to the game that wasn't implemented during the previous phases. The design team should be engaged in validating the gameplay using the GDD. Your QA team should be handling all of the bugs and also assisting with prototype playtesting. The producer is going to be managing the project timeline and hosting sprint meetings. And the marketing team should be preparing for the product launch roadmap. And here are just a few tips that'll help you be more successful as a producer during the testing phase. It is very common for testing to be deprioritized by senior leadership or investors, especially if the timeline has become more restricted or if previous phases has run over time and they've started to eat into the testing phase timeline. It's important that as a producer, you try your best to hold the line and ensure that play testing and the testing phase continues to be a priority for your project. By the time you get to this phase in your project, the team may start to lose motivation and be ready to move on to something else. So it's important that you continue to motivate them by celebrating their victories, both big and small. During sprint meetings, it may be good to call out specific team members who've done a great job in the previous sprint, or even the team leads for managing their teams well and ensuring that all of the deliverables have been completed. When deciding on an open or closed beta, the open beta testing is typically not recommended unless you're confident that the team can handle the increased workload. Having an open beta means a lot more bugs are going to be coming in. In a lot of cases, you're going to be receiving duplicates of the same bugs over and over again, and the QA team can get bogged down just filtering through the bugs to figure out which ones are valid. So in most cases, you're going to want a closed beta where the QA testers are not going to be overwhelmed by the amount of play testers and the amount of bugs that are being reported. This also allows you to vet your play testers a little bit more and ensure that you're getting quality QA testers to assist with the bug testing. And at the end of the day, you're probably not going to have time to fix every single bug in the game. So it's important that as the producer, you prioritize bugs that are most important to the vision of the game. So when the testing phase is complete, you'll want to host the testing phase review meeting. And like the previous phases, a majority of the time during this review meeting is going to be spent reviewing the deliverables. And the question you should be asking yourself is, are we ready to launch the game? When reviewing the phase timeline, you're going to want to ask if we stuck to the timeline and if we stuck to the project budget for the timeline. And you'll want to review resource requirements going into the launch phase to ensure that you have the infrastructure in place to handle the launch. At the end of this meeting, a decision needs to be made on whether you're ready to proceed to launch, whether you should wait, or whether you should wait until additional testing or additional deliverables can be completed. And if all goes well, you should be ready to proceed to the launch phase of your project. And that's what we'll discuss in the next lesson. Thanks for watching.